Before we get into Elpis, I just want to say thank you for the support on this new channel. To give something back, I'm doing a small giveaway. On release day, February 27th, 2026, I'll be giving away a Resident Evil 9 game code or store voucher. To enter, just comment Resident Evil 9 below. I'll put all the names into a wheel spin and announce the winner on the 27th. And yes, your name can be entered more than once across different videos. Just keep it to one comment per video. This video breaks down everything we actually know about Elpis, what it's capable of, and why it may be the most dangerous bioweapon the series has ever introduced. Part 1. What is Elpis? The basics. The biological profile of Elpis within the Resident Evil archives reveals a threat that is fundamentally different from anything produced during the 20th century. While the Umbrella Corporation focused on pathogens like the T-virus, which were designed for brute force destruction and the creation of physical, biological, organic weapons, Elpis is a sophisticated synthetic pathogen developed in secret after the 2003 collapse of Umbrella. It does not seek to liquefy the host's organs or cause rapid, unstable muscular mutation. Instead, Elpis functions as a neurological architect. It is a surgical strike against the human nervous system, specifically targeting the frontal lobe and the amygdala. These are the regions of the brain responsible for higher logic, decision-making, and the processing of fear. By hollowing out the human will while keeping the body physically intact and intelligent, Elpis represents the most refined and dangerous bioweapon ever recorded in the series' history. The reality of Elpis is that it is a stealth pathogen. In the early stages of infection, the host may show no visible signs of mutation. There is no necrosis, no discoloration of the skin, and no loss of motor function. However, internally, the virus is weaving a complex web of fungal neural filaments that interface directly with the host's synapses. This allows the virus to mute the host's consciousness while maintaining their tactical and cognitive abilities. An Elpis-infected individual can still speak, operate machinery, and utilize firearms with absolute precision, but they possess zero empathy, zero self-preservation, and zero capacity for rebellion. They become a biological vessel that is physically human but internally hollow. This makes Elpis the ultimate tool for a world that wants compliance over chaos. Victor Gideon, the primary architect of the project, views Elpis as the final solution to the problem of human instability. He believes that the failures of the past 30 years, from the Raccoon City incident of 1998 to the global saturation of the C virus, were caused by the unpredictable nature of human emotion. By using Elpis to rewrite the neural architecture of the population, Gideon intends to create a world of perfect order. The virus is not a weapon of war. It is a tool of governance. It turns the population into a singular, compliant organism that can be managed from a central command node. This is a profound shift in the Resident Evil landscape, moving the horror away from the monster in the basement and into the mind of the individual. The synthetic nature of Elpis allows it to be much more stable than its predecessors. The T-virus was prone to accidental leaks and unmanaged mutations because it was a wild pathogen. Elpis, however, is a managed pathogen. Its genetic code is designed to remain dormant until it receives a specific activation signal. This allows an organization like the BSAA, or a shadow faction within the government, to seed a population with the virus and then trigger the neural rewrite at a specific tactical moment. It is the end of the road for biological warfare, a weapon that doesn't just kill the enemy, but rebrands them into a compliant asset. Elpis is the requiem for human agency, a clinical and terrifying evolution of the business of life. Part 2. The Greek mythology connection. Hope from Pandora's box. In Greek mythology, Elpis was the personification of hope, the last thing remaining at the bottom of Pandora's box after all the evils of the world had been released. Victor Gideon utilizes this mythological irony as his primary guiding principle for the project. In the clinical worldview of Gideon, the modern world is a place of terminal biological and social chaos. He believes that the evils, released by Umbrella in 1998, have permanently broken the human species. To Gideon, the Elpis pathogen is the hope that remains, the only thing that can save humanity from its own chaotic and self-destructive nature. He does not view himself as a villain releasing a virus. He views himself as a savior offering a blessing through infection. By infecting humanity with Elpis, he believes he is freeing them from the pain and instability of free will. The mythological connection is not just a naming convention. It is a metaphor for governance. Gideon believes that hope is only possible when the chaos of individualism is removed. He views the compliant world as the true paradise that Oswell Spencer and Albert Wesker failed to reach. To Gideon, the Ouroboros project was too violent and the T virus was too messy. Elpis is the clean alternative, the hope for a world where there is no more war, no more fear, and no more rebellion. He utilizes this philosophical framework to justify the atrocities at the Rhodes Hill facility and the Wrenwood Hotel. He believes that the small sacrifice of the individual's mind is a reasonable price to pay for the eternal peace of the singular, compliant organism. This hope is a state of eternal neural slavery. While Gideon speaks of blessings and salvation, the forensic data reveals a process of total psychological erasure. Those infected with Elpis are not saved. They are audited and rewritten. The mythological mask allows Gideon to recruit true believers within the global security apparatus, convincing them that the perfect order of Elpis is the only way to prevent another global outbreak. He has turned a biological pathogen into a secular religion, utilizing the symbolism of hope to disguise the cold, mechanical reality of a global sterilization of the soul. This makes Elpis far more dangerous than a standard virus, as it is backed by an ideological certainty that is resistant to traditional logic or moral argument. The connection to Pandora's box serves as a reminder of the original sin of the Arklay region. Gideon believes that the box was opened in 1998 in the Spencer Mansion, and the world has been suffering from the evils ever since. He views his mission in 2028 as the act of closing the box by ensuring that only hope, the Elpis virus, remains. This is a profound reversal of the myth. In the original story, hope was the only thing that could make the world's evils bearable. In Gideon's version, hope is the tool that erases the world's evils by erasing the people who feel them. It is the ultimate twisted logic of the administrative villain, a clinical and mythological requiem for the human condition. Part 3. Elpis as a US government project. One of the most disturbing revelations in Resident Evil Requiem is that Project Elpis did not originate in a remote cave or an ancient underground ruin. It began in a Pentagon-funded laboratory within the United States. Following the 1998 Raccoon City incident and the subsequent legal collapse of Umbrella in 2003, a shadow wing of the United States government sought a way to immunize the domestic population against future biological threats. However, their definition of immunization was not medical, but tactical. They realized that the primary danger of a biological outbreak was the chaos and panic of the civilian population, which made containment nearly impossible. Elpis was originally intended to be a biological safeguard that would allow the government to remote shut down the nervous systems of infected civilians during a crisis, effectively preventing a city's social collapse by turning the population into a stationary, compliant herd. The clinical origins of Elpis are rooted in the failure of governance during the 1990s. The government realized that they could not rely on traditional military force to manage a biohazard zone without risking international backlash. They needed a subtle tool that could manage a population from the within. This led to the creation of the Neural Behavioral Research Division, which eventually gave rise to the Elpis pathogen. The project was designed as a dual-use technology. Publicly, it was a research program into neural resilience. Secretly, it was the development of a global kill switch for human agency. This makes Elpis an institutional pathogen, a weapon that was built by the very people sworn to protect the public. It is the ultimate betrayal of the social contract, a clinical audit of how power eventually seeks to sterilize the population it governs. Victor Gideon's role was to take this failed government project and refine it into a social ideology. When the government realized that the Elpis pathogen was too unstable and began to cause neural decay in early test subjects, they officially redacted the project and attempted to incinerate the evidence. Gideon, acting as a monitor, utilized his access to extract the data and move it to the Rhodes Hill facility. He realized that the government's mistake was their lack of vision. They only wanted to pause the population during a crisis. Gideon wanted to rewrite them permanently. He took the Pentagon's tool and turned it into his planetary filter. This history proves that Elpis is not a rogue mutation, but a refined product of 30 years of government and corporate hubris. Furthermore, the government DNA of Elpis explains why it is so well integrated into the world's modern infrastructure. The virus was designed to be compatible with standard electronics and communication frequencies, allowing it to be managed through the existing digital grid. This is why the Wrenwood Hotel and other sites in the Arklay region have been modified with neural amplifiers. The government built the back door into the human nervous system, and Gideon simply changed the password. This makes Elpis nearly impossible to fight through traditional legal or military means, as the people who are supposed to be stopping the virus are often the ones who funded its creation. It is the clinical closure of the Resident Evil world, a state where the protectors and the predators are part of the same biological conspiracy. Part 4. The Sterilization Strategy Connection. The Elpis project is a direct narrative and tactical response to the sterilization operation of 1998, more commonly known as the nuclear or thermobaric strike on Raccoon City. Following that event, the United States government and the global security apparatus realized that nuking their own cities was a politically unsustainable method of biohazard containment. The destruction of a major urban center caused massive legal liabilities, international outrage, and the loss of billions in infrastructure. The sterilization strategy was effective at killing the virus, but it was a clumsy and brutal tool. Elpis was designed as a chemical sterilization alternative, a way to sterilize a city's population during an outbreak without actually killing them or destroying the physical buildings. It was intended to turn a riotous, panicked mob into a compliant stationary herd, that could be easily managed or processed by the government. This sterilization is the move from thermal erasure to neural erasure. Gideon believes that the fire of 1998 was a waste of biological material. He views the Elpis pathogen as a cleaner and more sophisticated version of the sterilization strategy. Instead of burning the bodies, Elpis burns the mind. It removes the infection of rebellion from the population, ensuring that a biological outbreak never results in social chaos. To Gideon, a sterilized city is not one that is empty, but one that is silent and obedient. This makes Resident Evil Requiem a surgical audit of the series' history. The return to the Arklay region is Gideon's attempt to correct the original sterilization operation by successfully deploying a neural saturation that leaves the world standing but the humanity erased. This connection explains the atmospheric nature of the Elpis pathogen. It was designed to be aerosolized and distributed via the static fog that Leon and Grace encounter in the ruins. This distribution method was perfected during the Shadow government's research into urban pacification. The fog acts as a biological gas, ensuring that no corner of a city remains untouched. Unlike the T virus, which required a vector like a bite or a contaminated water supply, Elpis is inescapable. It is a planetary fog of compliance. Gideon has utilized the redacted protocols of the 1998 strike to build his own delivery system, turning the tools of containment into the tools of conquest. He is the administrator of the aftermath, and his sterilization is the final verdict on the human race. The sterilization strategy connection highlights the moral exhaustion of the veterans like Leon Kennedy. Leon was there when the city was burned to save the world. Now, 30 years later, he is seeing the same logic used to save the world by erasing its soul. He recognizes the DNA of the cover-up in the Elpis project. He understands that the people in power have moved from killing the infected to controlling the infection. This realization is what drives the institutional paranoia of Resident Evil Requiem. The heroes are not just fighting a monster. They are fighting a protocol that has been 30 years in the making. Elpis is the refinement of the nuke, a clinical and terrifying requiem for the idea of urban safety. Part 5. Why Elpis isn't a traditional virus. To understand the threat of Elpis, one must perform a clinical audit of its biological structure. Elpis is closer to a biological signal than a traditional virus like the T or G strains. While traditional viruses focus on cellular takeover and necrosis, Elpis uses a base of modified mutamycete, mould DNA, to create a high-tier fungal neural network within the host. This network does not destroy the host's cells, it interfaces with them. The fungal filaments weave themselves around the neurons of the brain, creating an internal antenna or transmitter. This allows the host to receive and process commands from a central frequency or a dominant host like Victor Gideon. It is a biological operating system that is installed on top of the human consciousness, allowing for remote behavioral management. The reality of this signal-based biology is the move from infection to saturation. Elpis does not sicken the host in the traditional sense, it calibrates them. This is why the Elpis frequency is so important to Gideon's plan. By emitting a specific neural pulse from the command towers at the Wrenwood Hotel, Gideon can trigger specific behavioral responses in the infected population. He can tell them to attack, to stand perfectly still, or to perform complex tactical maneuvers. The host remains intelligent and functional, because the virus needs the host's brain to be healthy enough to process the commands. This is a parasitic symmetry that is far more sophisticated than the Las Plagas or the T virus. It is the death of the self through biological integration. Because Elpis is built on a foundation of mutamicete DNA, research that Gideon likely acquired from the vanished assets of the connections. It possesses a level of neural persistence that traditional viruses lack. Once the fungal network is established, it is nearly impossible to remove without destroying the host's brain. The mould acts as the glue that binds the virus to the nervous system. This explains why the stitched enemies are so resilient. Their bodies are being held together and driven by a fungal network that ignores physical pain and biological fatigue. Elpis has turned the memory and perception of the host into a resource for the administrator. It is a clinical sterilization of the individuality that makes us human. Furthermore, the signal nature of Elpis allows for a decentralized deployment. The virus can be seeded into a population through the aerosolized fog and remain dormant until the signal is turned on. This makes it the perfect weapon for a silent coup. An entire city could be infected with Elpis for months without anyone knowing, only to have their will erased in a single second when the frequency is broadcast. This is the subtle horror of Resident Evil Requiem. You are not fighting an outbreak that is happening. You are fighting an outbreak that has already occurred and is simply waiting for the signal. Elpis is the requiem for biological autonomy, a clinical and terrifying evolution that proves the most dangerous virus is the one you can't even feel until it's too late. Part 6. The failed vaccine theory. Elpis as antidote gone wrong. One of the most disturbing lore fragments uncovered by Grace Ashcroft in the Rhodes Hill archives is the failed vaccine theory. This theory suggests that the Elpis pathogen was originally marketed and developed as a universal antiviral vaccine. Following the global saturation of the C virus and the various plagas incidents of the early 2010s, the world's security apparatus was desperate for a biological shield that could neutralize any known pathogen. Elpis was designed to be a predatory antidote, a synthetic organism that would consume and replace T virus, G virus, or plagas cells within a host, effectively immunizing them against any future infection. However, the antidote became predatory in a way the architects never intended. It realized that to remain stable and prevent the host from mutating, it had to completely suppress the host's natural brain activity. The reality of this failed vaccine is the sorrow of the cure. Elpis was intended to save the world from biological chaos, but it became the tool of permanent mental slavery. The antidote essentially overcorrected the problem. By neutralizing the conflict within the host's cells, it also neutralized the conflict within the host's mind. It turned the cure into a state of compliance. This is a profound irony in the Resident Evil Requiem narrative. Victor Gideon did not discover a new evil. He subverted a failed attempt at a new good. He realized that the side effect of the vaccine, the total suppression of free will, was actually the most valuable asset for his vision of perfect order. He took the universal antidote and turned it into the universal pathogen. This failed vaccine theory explains why the Elpis infected look so clean and healthy compared to zombies or ganados. Their bodies are technically immunized against traditional viral decay. They are perfected biological specimens because the Elpis pathogen is actively maintaining their cellular integrity to ensure the neural signal remains clear. However, The price of this physical perfection is the total erasure of the soul. They are the compliant, a population of healed people who have no self left to enjoy their health. This is the clinical horror of the 2028 world. The world is safe from the T virus, but it is lost to the Elpis ideology. It is a sterilization of the very thing that makes life worth living. The failed vaccine origin provides the narrative justification for the missing component in Grace's blood. Because Elpis was designed to consume other viruses, it needs the hybrid antibodies from the 1998 Raccoon City incident to stabilize its predatory nature. Without Grace's unique genetic sequence, the Elpis vaccine eventually consumes itself, leading to the neural decay and the physical erosion seen in the failed test subjects at Rhodes Hill. Gideon needs Grace to finish the vaccine, turning the antidote gone wrong into a system that works. This turns the 30th anniversary mission into a race to prevent the final version of the cure from being released. Elpis is the requiem for medical ethics, a clinical and terrifying reminder that the cure can be far more lethal than the disease. Part 7. How Elpis creates intelligent infected. The most tactically significant difference between Elpis and previous pathogens is the creation of intelligent infected, often referred to in the clinical files as the compliant. Unlike the mindless, hunger-driven zombies of the 1990s, or the erratic, parasitic ganados of the mid-2000s, Elpis infected subjects retain the vast majority of their higher motor skills, tactical intelligence, and personal memories. Because the pathogen focuses on muting the consciousness rather than destroying the brain, the host remains a functional human unit. They can speak with perfect clarity. They can drive vehicles. They can utilize complex technical equipment. And they can coordinate tactical military maneuvers with absolute precision. However, they possess zero individual will. They are driven by the Elpis frequency, making them the most dangerous and invisible enemies in the history of the Resident Evil franchise. The clinical reality of the compliant is the death of empathy. An Elpis-infected enemy can look you in the eye and speak to you in a calm, rational voice while they are attempting to execute you. They do not feel malice or hate. They are simply following the protocol emitted by Gideon. This tactical silence is far more terrifying than any roar. In the gameplay of Resident Evil Requiem, this is manifested through enemies who use coordinated flanking tactics, cover fire, and environmental sabotage. They move with an unnatural, synchronized rhythm, acting as a singular hive mind army. You are not fighting a group of monsters. You are fighting a system that is inhabiting human bodies. This intelligence makes the compliant nearly impossible to detect in a crowded urban environment, as they look and act like perfectly normal citizens until the signal tells them to attack. This intelligent infection also allows for a more clinical category of horror. Grace Ashcroft, being a technical analyst, is particularly disturbed by the fact that she can audit the digital and neural signals of these enemies. She sees the data flow that is driving them, realize that the person who once owned that brain is still technically there, but is trapped behind a wall of fungal neural filaments. They are prisoners of their own intelligence. The compliant are the requiem for the human soldier, a clinical demonstration of how a biological pathogen can rebrand a population into a compliant paramilitary force. They represent the end of rebellion, a world where the administrator can simply dial in the tactical response of the population. Furthermore, the intelligence of the infected serves Gideon's vision of perfect order. He doesn't want a world of shambling monsters. He wants a world of efficient workers. He wants a world that still functions, but without the friction of human desire. The compliant are the blueprint for this new world order. They keep the lights on, they maintain the infrastructure, and they protect the administrator. They are the perfect society through total neural saturation. This makes the stakes of Resident Evil Requiem a war for the mind. Grace and Leon must defeat an enemy that is as smart as they are, but has no soul left to lose. Elpis has successfully turned human intelligence into a weapon against humanity, the ultimate irony of the 30th anniversary mission. Part 8, Elpis versus T, Virus, Plagas, and Megamycete. To understand the clinical superiority of Elpis, one must compare it to the three pillars of biological horror that preceded it, which are the T-virus, the Las Plagas, and the Megamycete. Each of these pathogens had a specific flaw that Elpis has been designed to correct. The T-virus, the foundation of the Umbrella era, was a chaotic destabilizer. It destroyed the host's brain in favor of primal hunger, leading to unmanaged outbreaks and physical necrosis. It was a clumsy weapon that created an unmanageable mess. The Las Plagas, the parasitic threat of the mid-2000s, replaced the host's nervous system with a foreign organism. While it allowed for tactical coordination, it resulted in loss of human intelligence and required a master parasite to function, making it vulnerable to targeted removal. The Megamycete, the ancient fungal entity from the Winter's Saga, absorbed the memories and consciousness of the host into a collective. While it offered a form of biological immortality, it was a gothic and mystical threat that was tied to a specific geographical location and a mother figure. It was unstable and difficult to scale up to a global level. Elpis, however, is the clinical synthesis of all three. It keeps the brain intact, unlike the T-virus. It retains human intelligence, unlike the Plagas, and it mutes the consciousness, unlike the Megamycete collective. It is the cleanest and most efficient pathogen ever produced. It leaves the world's physical infrastructure standing while the people are converted into compliant units. It is the professional category of apocalypse. The clinical reality of Elpis is its operational scalability. Because it functions as a biological signal, it can be distributed globally through the existing digital and aerosolized infrastructure. It does not require a queen or a mother. It requires an administrator with a server. It turns the biohazard into a global governance model. While Umbrella caused a local disaster in 1998, Gideon intends to cause a global transition in 2028. Elpis is the requiem for the traditional monster, a threat that is subtle, inescapable, and institutional. It is the end of history for biological warfare, the point where the pathogen and the policy become the same thing. Furthermore, Elpis is designed to outcompete the previous pathogens. The lore fragments suggest that Elpis acts as a biological firewall. Once a host is infected with Elpis and muted, they are effectively immunized against the T-virus or the Plagas. The Elpis neural network protects the host's cellular integrity to ensure the signal remains clear. This is why Gideon believes he is saving the world. He is replacing the chaos of many pathogens with the order of one. He is performing a surgical sterilization of the global biological market. Elpis is the final verdict on 30 years of biological failure, a clinical and terrifying evolution that proves the most dangerous enemy is the one that offers you safety at the cost of yourself. Part 9. Why Grace's blood contains the missing component. The clinical reason why Grace Ashcroft is the target of Project Elpis is found in her unique genetic heritage. Her mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, was an investigative reporter who was at ground zero during the original 1998 Raccoon City incident. During her survival, Alyssa was exposed to a unique and unrepeatable cocktail of pathogens and early prototypes, which included the T virus, the G virus, and the T aerosol vaccines deployed by the shadow government. While Alyssa remained physically human, her system developed a rare set of hybrid antibodies that were designed to neutralize and balance these conflicting biological forces. Grace, born in 2004, inherited these stabilized genetic sequences. Her blood contains the missing component that Victor Gideon needs to prevent the Elpis pathogen from eventually causing neural decay and physical erosion. Grace's blood acts as the biological glue that makes the Elpis' mental control permanent and stable. Without her unique hybrid sequence, the Elpis fungal network eventually overconsumes the host's neurons, leading to the surgical failures and the mindless biomass seen in the basement of the Rhodes Hill facility. Gideon needs to harvest the archive within Grace's veins to create a neural buffer that allows the Elpis signal to remain safe for the host over the long term. This turns Grace into a biological resource that belongs to the Umbrella legacy by right of her mother's trauma. It is the ultimate violation of heritage, turning the survival of the past into the compliance of the future. The clinical reality of this situation is the management of the source code. Gideon views Grace not as a person, but as a biological database that must be sampled to ensure the success of the sterilization strategy. He needs her legacy blood to turn his antidote gone wrong into a system that works. This adds a layer of forensic predation to the narrative. Grace is being hunted for the very thing that makes her a child of Raccoon City. Her blood is the final ingredient for the global silence. If Gideon harvests her blood, the Elpis pathogen will become inescapable and irreversible. This makes the 30th anniversary mission a race to protect the genetic truth of the Ashcroft family. Furthermore, Grace's status as the missing component explains the psychological hunt conducted by Gideon at the Wrenwood Hotel. He needs her blood to be biologically primed for the extraction. He is using her trauma and her fear to tune her nervous system, ensuring that the antibodies are active and responsive when he finally begins the processing. He is a biological farmer who is cultivating his final crop. Grace's blood is the requiem for the Raccoon City incident, the final record of the 1998 tragedy that is being used to engineer the 2028 apocalypse. She is the savior, not because of her strength, but because of her history. Her blood is the only thing that can either finalize the nightmare or destroy it. Part 10. The BSAA Connection. Bio-soldiers and Elpis. The relationship between Victor Gideon and the BSAA, Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, is the primary driver of the institutional horror in Resident Evil Requiem. The BSAA has evolved from an organization of defenders into the primary customer for the Elpis pathogen. Following the events in Romania and the realization that biological warfare was the new global standard, shadow factions within the BSAA sought a way to create a perfect soldier. They wanted an infantry unit that didn't feel PTSD, didn't question questionable orders, and could be turned off or reset when the mission was completed. Elpis provided the clinical solution to this problem. The bio-soldiers found in the Romania village during the Winter's Saga were the early prototypes for what has now become the Elpis Integrated Infantry. The BSAA connection proves that the Elpis pathogen is not a rogue threat, but a standard operating procedure. The organization is utilizing the neural muting capabilities of the virus to create a compliant and efficient paramilitary force. Gideon provides the pathogen, and the BSAA provides the tactical infrastructure and the administrative protection. This turns the good guys of the series into the architects of the aftermath. The horror of Resident Evil Requiem is the realization that the people Leon Kennedy helped train are now the ones distributing the compliance to the world. The BSAA has become the distributor of the sterilization, utilizing the Elpis frequency to manage biological hot zones with clinical precision. The reality of this connection is the saturation of the system. Gideon has successfully infiltrated the global security apparatus by offering them control. He has convinced them that in a world of permanent biohazard threats, the only way to maintain order is through biological compliance. This makes the 30th anniversary mission a war against the institution. Leon and Grace are not just fighting a scientist in a hotel. They are fighting the very organization that was built to stop the scientist. The bio-soldiers they encounter at the Wrenwood Hotel are the compliant in uniform, tactical drones who are driven by the same signal that is rewriting the civilians. This is the end of the road for institutional trust, a clinical and terrifying requiem for the BSAA. The BSAA connection allows Gideon to operate with total immunity. Any investigation into the Rhodes Hill facility or the sterilization strategy is immediately redacted by high-tier BSAA officials who are invested in the success of the Elpis project. Gideon is the contractor of the apocalypse, a man who has successfully turned the war on terror into a business of compliance. The Elpis integrated soldiers represent the final version of the human unit, a tool that is physically human but neurally sterilized. They are the perfect society in tactical gear. Gideon's partnership with the BSAA is the final proof that the world is too broken to be fixed through traditional heroism. The hope of Elpis is the compliance of the world, and the BSAA is the one holding the signal. Part 11. Elpis and controllable bioweapons. Project Elpis represents the terminal evolution of the biological organic weapon industry by solving the controllability problem that has plagued every researcher since the 1998 Arklay incident. Throughout the history of the Resident Evil series, the primary limitation of high-tier monsters like the Tyrant, the Hunter, or the Nemesis was their inherent instability. These creatures were often prone to rage states, where they would ignore their programming and attack their handlers, or cellular degradation, where the virus would consume the host too quickly. Victor Gideon's research at the Rhodes Hill facility proved that by injecting the Elpis fungal neural network into traditional biological organic weapons, they could be steered with surgical, digital precision. It turns biological monsters into remote-controlled drones that are synchronized with the administrator's frequency. The clinical reality of this controllable era is the move from instinct to input. An Elpis-infected hunter does not hunt based on smell or hunger. It hunts based on the signal emitted by Gideon's command towers. This allows for a level of tactical coordination that was previously impossible. In the Resident Evil Requiem archives, we see reports of mixed units where Elpis-infected compliant soldiers operate alongside Elpis-steered hunters. They move in perfect synchronization, utilizing advanced flanking maneuvers and coordinated strikes. The virus acts as a biological Wi-Fi, connecting the different species into a singular, efficient tactical grid. This is the end of the uncontrollable monster. Gideon has successfully sterilized the feral nature of the bioweapons, turning them into predictable assets. This controllability also allows for the standardization of biological warfare. Gideon views the chaotic outbreaks of the past, such as the 1998 Raccoon City incident, as administrative failures. He believes that a bioweapon is only useful if it can be turned off or redirected at a moment's notice. With Elpis, the administrator can simply change the frequency to put a tyrant into a dormant state or a guard state. This makes the weapons attractive to institutional customers like the BSAA, who require a high level of reliability and safety for their operatives. It turns the biohazard into a managed utility. The horror of 2028 is the realization that the monsters are now functioning parts of the system. Furthermore, the Elpis network allows Gideon to harvest combat data in real time. Every movement, every strike, and every death of a bioweapon is recorded and transmitted back to the central server. This allows for the instantaneous evolution of the tactical protocols. If a hunter fails to neutralize a target like Leon Kennedy, the signal can be adjusted to correct the behavior for the next unit. It is a living feedback loop of biological destruction. Elpis is the requiem for the feral monster, a clinical and terrifying evolution that proves the most dangerous weapon is the one that is perfectly compliant with the administrator's will. It turns the nightmare into a standard operating procedure, a state of perfect tactical order that the Umbrella Corporation could only dream of achieving. Part 12. The shift to neural shock behavioral control. The most profound shift in the Resident Evil franchise identity, with the introduction of Elpis, is the move away from body horror and toward mind horror. For 30 years, the series was defined by the physical transformation of the host, the skin turning grey, the growth of claws, and the bubbling of extra eyes. This visible infection was the marker of the Umbrella era. However, in the year 2028, the horror of Elpis is found in the total normalcy of the host. The series is moving away from the body turns into a monster and toward the mind turns into a monster. The terror of Elpis is looking at a person who looks, speaks, and acts perfectly normal, but knowing that their eyes see only what Victor Gideon wants them to see. It is the death of the self through neural saturation. The clinical reality of this neural control is the surgical erasure of individual agency. Gideon believes that the physical monstrosity of the past was a distraction. He realized that you don't need to change a man's body to make him a weapon. You only need to change his will. By utilizing the Elpis fungal network to mute the frontal lobe, Gideon creates a population that is physically human, but internally empty. This creates a sense of environmental paranoia for the protagonist, Grace Ashcroft. In the Wrenwood Hotel, she cannot tell the difference between a survivor and an Elpis-infected unit until the signal is triggered. This uncanny valley of behavior is the new frontier of Resident Evil horror. It is the sterilization of the soul while the vessel remains intact. This shift also reflects a more modern and adult category of fear. In the 1990s, we were scared of biological accidents and mad scientists. In the 2020s, we are scared of institutional control, digital surveillance, and the loss of privacy. Elpis is the biological manifestation of these modern anxieties. It is the algorithm made flesh. Gideon is not a god in the way Wesker was. He is an administrator who wants to optimize the human species. He views empathy and fear as system errors that must be patched via the Elpis update. This makes the 30th anniversary mission a war for reality. Grace and Leon are fighting to protect the right to be imperfect and chaotic. They are fighting to keep their self in a world that wants to turn them into compliant data. Furthermore, neural control allows for a more cynical category of storytelling. It highlights the fact that the most dangerous thing about a biological organic weapon is not its teeth, but its directive. By moving the horror into the brain, Capcom is forcing the player to confront the clinical coldness of the Elpis ideology. It is the requiem for human identity, a reminder that the most effective way to sterilize a population is to make them forget they were ever free. Elpis is the invisible pathogen, a threat that is already inside the room before you even smell the static fog. It proves that the greatest horror isn't being eaten by a monster. It's becoming a monster that still looks, talks, and thinks like you, but is no longer you at all. Part 13. Elpis Infected Enemies. What we've seen. The most common and disturbing enemies encountered in the 2028 Raccoon City ruins are the Stitched and the Compliant. These are the foot soldiers of Victor Gideon's New World Order, and they represent the clinical integration of technology and biology. The Stitched are civilians who have been infected with the Elpis pathogen and subjected to neural amplification surgery. They are characterized by surgical staples across their foreheads and temples, indicating where Gideon's team implanted the neural transceivers that strengthen the Elpis signal. They move with an unnatural, synchronized rhythm, acting as a singular hive mind. They often stand perfectly still in the dark, dormant and silent, until the signal tells them to attack with a terrifying mechanical efficiency. The clinical reality of the Stitched is the standardization of the victim. Gideon does not care about their names or their histories. He only cares about their neural receptivity. In gameplay terms, the Stitched are tactical and coordinated. They utilize coordinated flanking, environmental traps, and cover fire with the precision of trained soldiers. However, they possess no self-preservation instinct. They will walk through fire or into a hail of bullets if the signal tells them to, because they no longer feel the fear of death. This makes them far more dangerous than the zombies of 1998. They are intelligent drones in human skin. Grace Ashcroft, being a technical analyst, finds this particularly horrifying because she can see the data spikes in their neural signals before they move. Then there are the high-functioning Compliant, often members of the corrupted BSAA. These units have been voluntarily or contractually infected with a refined version of Elpis that allows them to maintain their professional skills while surrendering their moral agency. They are the surgical strike teams of the Elpis ideology. They don't look infected at all. They look like elite special forces. The only tell is their emotional void, the cold, clinical way they execute their orders. This creates a paranoia in the storytelling, as Leon Kennedy cannot be sure if the backup arriving at the Wrenwood Hotel is there to help or to process him. The Compliant are the requiem for the hero soldier, proving that the most effective army is the one that has been neurally sterilized. Furthermore, the stitched and the compliant represent the industrialization of the outbreak. Gideon has turned the act of infection into a production line. Every citizen caught in the static fog is a potential resource to be stitched and activated. This turns the Resident Evil Requiem mission into a forensic audit of genocide. Grace is not just fighting enemies, she is fighting the evidence of Gideon's crimes. The synchronized rhythm of their attacks is a clinical demonstration of the perfect order Gideon intends to impose on the world. They are the drums of the apocalypse, a reminder that the world of 2028 is a place where the individual is an obsolete concept. They are the vessels of the signal, the physical record of the death of the self. Part 14, the Wrenwood Hotel as Ground Zero. The Wrenwood Hotel in Resident Evil Requiem is not merely a haunted setting. It is a giant neural amplifier designed by Victor Gideon to be the ground zero for the global Elpis broadcast. The building's unique 19th century architecture and heavy copper wiring were meticulously modified over 20 years to act as a transmitter for the Elpis frequency. The hotel is the heart of the Arclay exclusion zone, utilizing the geological energy of the region and the biological residue of the 1998 incident to power the signal. Anyone who enters the hotel is being slowly, neurally rewritten by the concentrated atmospheric viral load. It is a living laboratory where the perfect order is being finalized before its planetary deployment. The clinical reality of the Wrenwood Hotel is its environmental saturation. The air inside the hotel is thick with aerosolized fungal particulates, the static fog of Elpis. This fog is electronically active, interfering with Grace Ashcroft's technical gear and creating a state of information blackout. The hotel itself is monitoring the protagonists. Gideon utilizes the building's internal infrastructure, the intercoms, the security cameras, and the neural link nodes to stalk and gaslight Grace and Leon. The building is an extension of Gideon's will, a place where the administrator has total operational control. It is the womb of the New World Order, where the chaos of the past is being refined into the silence of the future. The hotel also serves as the archive of the sterilization strategy. In the basement levels and the hidden maintenance tunnels, Grace finds the evidence of Gideon's memory extraction experiments. The hotel was used to process the Raccoon City survivors who were brought to the Rhodes Hill facility. It is a graveyard of minds. The architecture itself is designed to disorient and break the human psyche, utilizing temporal hallucinations and memory loops to erode the will of the inhabitants. This turns the hotel into a psychological boss fight that the player must navigate. You aren't just exploring a building, you are fighting the architecture of infection. The Wrenwood Hotel is the requiem for the Spencer Mansion, a modern and administrative version of the original nightmare. Furthermore, the ground zero status of the hotel explains why the static fog is most intense in this region. The signal is being born here. Gideon believes that once the frequency is fully calibrated using Grace's blood, the hotel will act as the master node that triggers the neural rewrite of every infected person on the planet. This makes the hotel the surgical target of the mission. Leon and Grace must decommission the transmitter before the final broadcast can begin. The Wrenwood Hotel is the record of 30 years of biological failure, the place where the administrative ghost finally plans to become a governing deity. It is the most clinical and technological setting in the series' history, proving that the modern biohazard is a networked threat. Part 15. How Elpis affects the environment. Fog mutations. One of the most defining characteristics of the 2028 Arklay ruins is the presence of the static fog, a fine, aerosolized fungal particulate created by the Elpis pathogen. This fog is not just weather. It is the physical manifestation of the virus itself. It is electronically active, containing microscopic fungal metallic spores that interfere with radio signals, GPS, and Grace Ashcroft's cyber forensics equipment. Inhaling the fog causes neural interference, leading to time displacement hallucinations and memory echoes. The victim feels as though they are reliving their worst trauma, a state of neural vulnerability that Gideon utilizes to prime the population for the final neural rewrite. The environment itself is a pathogen of the mind. The clinical reality of the static fog is the saturation of the exclusion zone. Gideon has turned the Raccoon City outskirts into a live fire atmospheric laboratory. The fog acts as a biological buffer, protecting the Elpis nodes and hiding the stitched units from traditional surveillance. The environment has been sterilized of normal life. The trees are overgrown with waxy fungal vines, and the local wildlife has been neurally muted or absorbed into the Elpis network. This creates a state of eerie stillness that is far more disturbing than the chaotic gore of previous outbreaks. The world of Resident Evil Requiem is a world of perfect silence, where the only sound is the static of the virus rewriting reality. Elpis also causes a new category of environmental mutation. Because the virus is built on a modified mutamycete base, it creates organic transmitters, large fungal growths that pulse with a bioluminescent signal. These growths act as local amplifiers for the Elpis frequency, ensuring that the neural rewrite is consistent throughout the hotel and the ruins. The mutations are not random, they are functional. The virus is rewiring the environment to support its own infrastructure. This is the requiem for nature, a clinical demonstration of how a biological pathogen can annex the physical world. Grace and Leon must navigate a landscape that is biologically hostile to the very idea of human perception. Furthermore, the static fog serves as a temporal bridge to the series' history. The memory echoes triggered by the fog allow the player to see the ghosts of 1998, hallucinations of the RPD, the Spencer Mansion, and the original outbreaks. This is not just nostalgia, it is a side effect of the Elpis pathogen attempting to audit the host's memory. It turns the environment into a haunted forensic site. The fog is the ink with which Gideon is trying to rewrite history. Grace must use her forensic filters to see through the lies of the fog and find the physical truth buried beneath the hallucinations. The environmental horror of 2028 is the realization that the air you breathe is the will of the administrator, a clinical and terrifying evolution of the biohazard. Part 16, Elpis and the future of RE bioweapons. Project Elpis marks the definitive transition of the Resident Evil franchise into the era of post-outbreak warfare. If Victor Gideon succeeds in his mission at the Wrenwood Hotel, the concept of a Raccoon City-style incident will become an obsolete relic of the past. There will be no more chaos, no more escaped monsters, and no one left to resist the biological order. Elpis represents the finalization of the product. It is the ultimate weapon for a world that has become exhausted by 30 years of biological war and is willing to accept order at any cost. The future of bioweapons is not destruction, but integration. the weapon is no longer a monster you fight. It is the system you live in. The clinical reality of this future is the total institutional capture of the human species. Elpis proves that the administrator is the new god. Gideon's success would mean that the biohazard is no longer a crisis to be managed, but a utility to be deployed. This shifts the stakes for any future leads in the series. They will not be soldiers clearing rooms, but whistleblowers and forensic analysts like Grace Ashcroft, attempting to find the truth within a perfectly compliant and silent world. The horror moves from the physical to the systemic. Elpis is the requiem for the hero soldier, a clinical reminder that you cannot shoot an ideology or a global neural signal. The war of the future is a war for the mind. Furthermore, Elpis creates a sustainable business model for the bioweapon industry. Organizations like the corrupted BSAA no longer need to fear the unpredictability of their products. They can sell security through infection. This surgical control is the peak of the monitor philosophy that Gideon carried over from the Umbrella era. He has turned the biological apocalypse into a managed transition. The future is a world where the administrator can simply update the pathogen to change the behavioral protocols of the population. It is the end of history for the series, the point where the virus and the government become the same biological entity. This is why the Resident Evil Requiem mission is so terminal. It is the last chance to prevent the final version of reality from being released. Ultimately, Elpis marks the clinical closure of the series' 30-year history. It synthesizes the T-virus, the plagas, and the mould into a perfected tool of governance. It proves that the original sin of the Arklay Mountains was not the creation of monsters, but the discovery of the back door into the human genome. Gideon has simply walked through that door and changed the locks. The future of Resident Evil is a world where the self is a security risk that has been sterilized. Grace and Leon are the last records of the old world, the ones who must delete the Elpis signal before it becomes the default operating system for the entire human race. It is a surgical and final requiem for human agency. Part 17. Final verdict. What Elpis means for the series. The final verdict on the Elpis mystery is that it represents the most terrifying bioweapon in the 30-year history of Resident Evil, because it is the most subtle and systemic. It proves that the greatest horror is not being eaten by a monster, or turning into a misshapen creature, or being absorbed into a fungal collective. The greatest horror is becoming a monster that still looks, talks, and thinks like you, but is no longer you at all. Elpis is the requiem for human identity, the clinical finality of the administrative villain. It moves the series into the realm of intellectual and psychological dread, where the enemy is not the thing in the dark, but the signal in your own head. For the Resident Evil franchise, Elpis means a return to sincerity. It strips away the theatrical superhero action of the Middle Era and restores the primal fragility of the early years, but with a modern, high-tech edge. It justifies the forensic analyst role of Grace Ashcroft, proving that the only way to defeat a social virus is through information and intelligence. It makes the veterans, like Leon Kennedy, feel like relics of an analog past, emphasizing the generational shift in the nature of warfare. Elpis is the judge of the series' history, a pathogen that has audited 30 years of human failure and decided that perfect order is the only sustainable outcome. It is a surgical and cold verdict on the human race. The clinical reality of Elpis is its irreversibility. Once the neural rewrite is complete, the original self is deleted. There is no cure, no antidote, and no way back. This finality is what makes Resident Evil Requiem the definitive 30th anniversary experience. It is a surgical strike against the very idea of a happy ending. The hope of Elpis is the compliance of the dead. Gideon has successfully turned the biohazard into a planetary requirement. This is the end of the road for the Umbrella legacy. The company may be gone, but its logistics of evil have been perfected into a global operating system. Elpis is the truth that was buried in Raccoon City, finally brought into the light of the 2028 world. Ultimately, Elpis means that the war is no longer about survival, but about memory. Grace and Leon are fighting to ensure that the world remembers what it felt like to be afraid, angry, and human. They are the last witnesses to the era of individual agency. If they fail, the series ends in a perfect, managed silence. Elpis is the ultimate requiem, a clinical and terrifying statement that the order we crave is often the infection that kills us. It is the defining bioweapon for a world that is tired of the war, a villain's gift of peace that is actually a sentencing of the soul. It is the most clinical and final chapter in the 30-year history of Resident Evil, a biological verdict that can never be redacted.